Welcome, Nikki, and thank you for joining us at Adapt CIO Edge. And today's theme is prioritization and the enablement value of technology. What does that mean in your role?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me here to talk to you. This is an absolute delight. Prioritization, that's what it's all about, because everybody wants everything right now for no money, right? That's kind of it. So, when you have organizations that have different teams and different priorities, but, also competing for budget for different initiatives, then how do you actually rank what's going to happen now? So, to me, that's really what it's about, is looking at competing interests, limited budget, also having to educate an organization and its stakeholders around the longer term value.
So more demands, less resources, knowing what's important to get done now as you drive towards that future operating state. And as you think about how you prioritize spend, what are some of the things that are important when it comes to getting those quick returns on value?
I think that's the catch, right? Is that you want to have these quick wins but long-term gains. So, where do you put your resources in terms of, human capital, in terms of, tech capabilities, in terms of budget at the end of the day. And, for an organization, for decision makers, especially up at the top, ultimately, they want to see quick wins. They want to see something that's going to improve the balance sheets today, because they're ultimately accountable to their shareholders, to their investors, and so on and so forth. So, therein lies the challenge, because what you're looking to do is to make a case for a longer term horizon of an investment against the competing priority of needing to have these short-term wins.
No, absolutely. And I think, particularly as the cost of money is getting dearer as time goes on, being able to justify that expenditure not only to that business unit leader, but also to your primary advocates in the Chief Human Resources Officer, the Chief Financial Officer, and the other business unit leaders as well. When it comes to justifying and getting advocates for change, who do you primarily work with?
Well, this is the catch, right? I think if you're having to justify something, then you've gone completely askew, right? What you really want is you want the business coming to you and saying, this is the outcome that we want. How are we going to get there? That's the ultimate situation, right? I think one of the challenges that we have at the moment, especially when we talk about technology, is that technology, when you look at the P&L, is put under the L, right? It's put under the sunk costs. But another team gets to reap the benefits, right? So, for example, you might put in a CRM, and then, it's like, the tech team, they're spending all this money, they're spending, all of our time getting all these workshops happening, et cetera, to get this whole thing standing up. And then 6 months later, you have the sales team going, we've improved our performance, we have slimmer margins because we've actually been able to cut the human capital costs, we're improving our performance, etc. So it becomes this little bit of an imbalance, right? Because the tech team is seen as costs, whereas other teams are reaping the benefits. So, if we can think about, two things: rebalancing the conversation, that tech gets the recognition for the wins, I think is one thing. But secondly, also tying tech initiatives into the organizational goals, to say, if the organization wants to do X, Y, and Z, this is how we can help you get there.
So it's almost kind of like almost a diamond that we're talking about. So what are the foundations that we need in the bottom in terms of digital enablement? So things like RPA, IoT, digital twins, those kinds of things. But also then how are we aligning to those different business unit leaders' requirements in a way that's stable, simple, and can deliver that value, but ultimately tying it back to the organizational strategy as well. So when it comes to investing in these technologies, how do you measure that return on value? Are there those traditional economic instruments, or are there more intangibles that you focus on?
Yeah, and I think I'll pick up on a keyword that you mentioned, it's about simplicity. I think what we need to do is reframe the conversation and talk about big picture outcomes. Because if you can explain to the C-suite about, what are they going to get? What are they going to be able to benefit from? How's that going to impact their bottom line? And kind of sell them on this vision, right? To say, this is what you're going to get in this time frame. This is how it's going to help your organization. Then the technology is the how. The technology is the pathway. I like to use the analogy. I'm trained as an architect, building architect, not a systems architect. And a client might come to me and say, okay, we want a new office, or we want a new house, we want a new building. Go, great. You create this beautiful design, this beautiful vision. You really sell it to them. They're buying in. Go, yep, that's what I want, and they sell off on. They sign off on this design. We don't have conversations about, well, what kind of concrete are you using? Are you using, is there another concrete that we can use? Can we source it from somewhere else for cheaper? We're not having the what conversations. We're having these conversations about, outcomes. What's that big picture that we want to achieve? And kind of getting out of the weeds.
No, absolutely. Staying in that big picture, almost that commander's intent. So where are we going? Why are we going there? And then empowering our people to help us to get there as well. And as I think about the role of the office, the built environment more generally, certainly we see in our statistics that maybe 53% of employees will work from outside the office on any given day going forward. And as we think about home, office, but also those third spaces as well, how can we use technology to drive innovation and connection with our colleagues?
I think that's the $1 million question at the moment. Actually, to call it $1 million question is probably undervaluing it quite a lot, right? I'd challenge the thinking of, a home, office, third place. And I talk about this concept of the any place workplace, that wherever you have connectivity, you're working. Whether you're on the bus and sitting on your phone, if you're sitting at Starbucks, if you're sitting in the library, it doesn't matter anymore. It's a matter of where can we connect, how can we connect in. So, the future of work, the future of connection, of company culture is something that we're still yet to see. But I think another statistic that I found to be quite interesting is we're not just talking about return to office or slow return to office and this desire for flexible working in societies like ours, like Australia or the UK or the US. There's a very slow return to office, and for me as a real estate person, that's something that's quite confrontational. But I think one of the stats that I delved into in a little bit more detail recently, which I found to be quite fascinating, was around the Great Resignation and people wanting to, leave their roles to the great unknown, which we know the figures are, massive. And you can any poll might say between 30% to 60%, right? But what I found quite interesting in that one is that the largest contingent that wanted to leave their roles was actually in India.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so now we're thinking of it, and it's about why was that? Why was that? And it's a lack of upward mobility. So if we think about, India's role at the moment, great tech talent, call centers, so on and so forth. If we lose 40% of that workforce because they're dissatisfied, we're actually not talking about offices and spaces. We've got to look at, how do we retain that talent, wanting to do the types of roles that they do? How can we give them a higher and better purpose and upward mobility to be able to do that? So, I think when we're talking about, hybrid work, remote work, when we're talking about return to office, future workplace, etc., we do need to kind of cut it down. We do need to segment it by location, demographics, role type, personality type, introverts, extroverts, etc., etc., etc. Because these these stats are too broad. But I think at every single point, when you go to like one level down, like my example of, it's talent in India, it actually opens up a whole new picture. So maybe that's something. I know you guys do a talent, a talent event that's probably the types of questions that I'd be encouraging.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
good feedback as well, but particularly it's those small data, because sometimes you can aggregate up too far and it sort of irons out the wrinkles almost. But what we do see, certainly with Australian CIOs, particularly that IT culture development, those new digital ready skills, but also leadership development, not necessarily just on the folks on the treadmill, as it were, but the folks earlier in their career as well. And Nikki, if you were to leave one last thought with the ADAPT community, what would it be?
If I have to leave one last thought, I'd just say you have to think different. You know, the world has changed. It's changed in the past couple of years. It's changed in the past 20 years. We can't use playbooks or organisational culture from 20 years ago. It doesn't work anymore. And especially with this, this new generation coming through into the workforce, you know, with Gen Z that are digital natives, we can't expect them to do things in the way that, you know, millennials and generations before that were doing it. You know, they don't use notebooks. They don't go into encyclopedias. They don't go into libraries. Everything's digital first. So think different, rewrite the rules, and that's perfectly okay.